Hello, my name is Epiphany Wilson. I'm a second-year independent neuroscience major, biochemistry minor from Atlanta, Georgia, and I attend Spelman College. And today I will be presenting our study titled Identification of Resilient and At-Risk Census Tracts for Cardiovascular Disease Among Black and White Residents in Georgia. Cardiovascular disease remains one of the leading causes of death in Georgia and across the United States. Despite medical advances, significant racial disparities persist, particularly between Black and white adults. Black communities in Georgia continue to experience higher rates of cardiovascular mortality and morbidity. However, prior research from the Morehouse-Emory Cardiovascular Center for Health Equity, or MECA study, found something important. Not all neighborhoods with lower income levels experience poor cardiovascular outcomes. Some communities perform better than expected. These were identified as resilient neighborhoods, while others experiencing worse outcomes than expected were classified as at risk. Our study builds upon that foundational work. While the original MECA study focused on Metro Atlanta, our goal was to expand the analysis statewide using more recent data from 2019 to 2023. We wanted to understand how resilient and at-risk census tracts are distributed across the entire state of Georgia and whether the patterns differ for Black and white residents. We analyzed census tracts across Georgia, focusing specifically on Black and white adults aged 30 to 70. For outcomes, we examined both mortality and morbidity. Mortality included cardiovascular disease deaths. Morbidity included cardiovascular disease related emergency department visits and hospitalizations. We used the 2020 census population data as denominators and applied negative binomial regression models to account for count-based outcomes. Importantly, we controlled the median household income, age distribution, and gender composition within each census tract. We also restricted our analysis to census tracts with at least 200 Black residents aged 30 to 70 to ensure statistical stability. After running our models, we examined residuals, which represent how much a tract's observed cardiovascular outcomes differed from what would be expected based on income and demographic structure. Census tracts in the top 25% of residuals were classified as at risk, meaning that their outcomes were worse than expected. Those in the bottom 25% were classified as resilient, meaning their outcomes were better than expected. To strengthen classifications, tracts had to meet this threshold on at least two of the three cardiovascular measures. Our findings revealed meaningful geographic patterns. The distribution of resilient and at-risk census tracts varied across Georgia, and importantly, these patterns were different for Black and white residents. This suggests that the drivers of cardiovascular health are not uniform across racial groups. Table 1A and Table 1B show that cardiovascular mortality and morbidity rates were significantly higher in at-risk tracts compared to resilient tracts, confirming the validity of our classification model. We also examined differences in demographic, socioeconomic, housing, and transportation characteristics between resilient and at-risk tracts. Tables 2A and 2B demonstrate that these communities differ not only with health outcomes, but also in structural conditions such as income distribution, housing value, and indicators of inequality. For example, measures like the Gini index, which reflect income inequality, were associated with the likelihood of a tract being classified as at risk. Overall, our findings highlight that place matters. Cardiovascular health is not solely determined by individual behaviors or income levels. Structural and neighborhood factors contribute significantly to outcomes. Furthermore, the fact that resilient tracts exist across varying socioeconomic status suggests that there may be protected community characteristics worth studying further. There are limitations to consider. Because our data is cross-sectional, we cannot make casual claims. Additionally, some census tracts did not have sufficient population counts to be included in the analysis. However, this statewide expansion provides updated, comprehensive insight into cardiovascular disparities across Georgia. In conclusion, the geographic distribution and predictors of resilient and at-risk census tracts differ for Black and white adults in Georgia. These findings emphasize the importance of target, place-based interventions to reduce cardiovascular disparities. By identifying both vulnerable and resilient populations, we can better design policies and interventions that address structural drivers of health inequality. Thank you.